our guest of honor, Manfred Fred J. Schindler, from FIEEE, Independent Consultant and Chief Technology Officer in Anlotek Limited and IEEE Director Electrical for Division 4. I now request Sir to kindly take over and proceed with the session.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers of GUCON, the leaders of the university, and to all the honored guests. I served a few years ago as the chair of the IEEE Conferences Committee, so I thought it would be interesting to talk about conferences in general and see how it relates to what we're going through today, including in GUCON. So I'm just going to go over a little background in conferences, especially with IEEE conferences, talk a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the challenges that we see. Some of them are quite obvious and we've already heard about. And there are some silver linings, some benefits. Really don't want to use that term, but you know, there are advantages to the changes that we've been forced to make. So let's take a look at some of those. Then I want to talk about some concerns that maybe aren't so apparent. So just looking at IEEE conferences for the past 10 years or more, IEEE has sponsored about 1,500 conferences per year. About half of those are financially sponsored by the IEEE, and the other half are technically sponsored. So financially sponsored by another organization, another nonprofit, for example, a university, and then IEEE then supports the technical program. These conferences take place all around the world, and in recent years we've seen growth in a number of areas where technology leadership is emerging. India is one of those areas where we've seen a considerable amount of growth over the last 10 years or so in conference activity. Looking at the kind of conferences we see, most are primarily academic events. So these are opportunities for students and academics to present their work primarily to each other. And a characteristic of these conferences is that the number of attendees is roughly equal to the number of presenters. And the primary objective here is to publish academic work, get them posted in, for example, our library. I'm not to say that's the only motivation, but it's one of the primary motivations in such academic conferences. A minority of conferences feature strong industry participation. And I'll note that I've spent my entire career in industry, so I'm highly motivated to make sure that industry participation is a key feature in conferences for a bunch of reasons. But one of the key features you'll see in conferences with strong industry participation is the number of attendees is usually much larger than the number of presenters. We'll find the technical programs are much more varied, so instead of just having presentations of people's work, we'll also have workshops and short courses and tutorials and demonstrations, things that help our professionals in industry learn and further their careers. Networking opportunities are imperative in strong industry conferences. Imperative and plentiful. It's not to say that that's not also a feature of academic conferences, it certainly is, but it's much more of a key feature in conferences that have a strong industry participation. And then finally, large exhibits are often a feature in conferences with strong industry participation. And once again, that's not exclusive to these conferences. I've been to heavily academic conferences that have significant exhibits associated with them. These exhibits tend to be of companies that have services and components that that academics may want to use rather than what industry wants. So that's kind of the background of conferences and general and IEEE conferences in particular. So then we get to this year and the COVID-19 pandemic, which has really affected us all. Looking at the latest data on cases, and I just looked it up at the Johns Hopkins University website, which compiles data from around the world. So, we find ourselves now with, 34 million cases around the world. The two countries with the largest number of reported cases are the United States with over 7 million and India with over 6 million. Worldwide, we've seen over 1 million deaths. So significant impact on everyone's lives around the world. And as you've seen, a significant impact on conferences. So, starting last February, some conferences were forced to make some very quick decisions. Conferences that were taking place in certain places in February and then in March had to decide whether to cancel, postpone, go hybrid, go virtual, or try to do some combination of these things. And combinations, for example, were conferences that were taking place in early March would opt to postpone, so they had more time to decide what to do. There were conferences taking place much later in the year that postponed just so that they had time to work out the logistics of doing a virtual conference. This struggle with how to manage conferences will continue certainly through 2021 until the pandemic has wound down. As others have already noted, hybrid will almost certainly be the dominant model for most conferences going forward. Certainly when there are travel restrictions, convening a local group that can meet in person and allowing others in remote areas is a good approach. There are challenges, obviously, with people from around the world attending and in lots of different time zones, so pre-recorded material is generally a feature. But for people that are meeting together, obviously there need to be functions that physically attend. So, and it's certainly possible that some conferences will permanently adopt a virtual format, and we've heard from some conference organizers that that's what they intend to do, and we will see how this all evolves. I don't have a crystal ball. So silver linings. So are there some side benefits that we've seen? So obviously most conferences have opted for a virtual format in this year. Most of these conferences have reduced their fees, changed the registration categories, making it easier for people to afford to attend. Many conferences are experiencing record registration. Some conferences opted for free registration for non-authors in particular. That sounds very attractive for people, so they register. That doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as record participation. When it's free to register, it's easy to register, but that doesn't mean if you're busy, you will actually attend. So that's something that we've also seen. So we can't forget the value of a conference and making sure that people recognize that value. And paying a fee, even a nominal fee, helps encourage people to recognize there is value of a conference. The virtual conferences certainly remove some barriers to participation with the reduced cost, and time isn't lost traveling, as we've already heard. And so is this an opportunity to engage with broader communities? I would say that perhaps this is an opportunity to encourage industry professionals to participate in conferences that had previously been primarily academic. There certainly is content in academic conferences that professionals in industry can make use of. But there are other things that conferences can provide that industry values, and these can be panels of experts, workshops on specific topics, etc. So I encourage conferences to take advantage of the situation we're in and look at developing content that might increase the community's that participate in conferences. So there are some areas for concern, especially in a virtual conference world, and perhaps things that we haven't all thought of. But there may indeed be a temptation to relax quality and scope in conferences. Excuse me. Since people can more easily participate in a conference and don't need to travel to a conference, we can certainly try to attract more people to conferences. And in many ways that's a good thing, but we need to make sure that maintaining quality is paramount, and keeping conferences within a reasonable scope is important. And I don't say this lightly, because we certainly have seen issues with quality and scope in conferences in lots of different places, and especially those where conference involvement is growing. So key is the peer review process and understanding what the peer review process requires. IEEE policy requires that each paper be reviewed by at least 2 people. Certainly best practice is to have at least 3. And the other thing that needs to be recalled is that the papers need to be reviewed by 2 subject matter experts of that paper. And when a conference decides to let papers that are outside of their nominal scope be part of the conference, often there's a challenge to making sure that there are actually 2 subject matter experts for each paper. And reviewers' self-assessments of their expertise isn't always accurate. And we do indeed see papers, including pseudoscience papers, coming in through conferences when the scope isn't closely controlled. There are also many conferences that are charging a higher registration fee to authors and presenters, and this makes a lot of sense. It's justified because of the cost of developing a technical program, and the authors get an additional value in being able to publish that regular attendees don't get. So that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and I'm certainly not arguing against it. But it does start to make conference look a lot like an open access model, but it's not. The material, when it gets posted and gets explored, is not free for all to see. And if open access conferences do become more common, and there are indications that they may, then there will be fees associated with just order processing that is required in order to get something to explore, since there's no revenue from people and libraries access to it. So that's just a caution, something we need to worry about in the future. And then, of course, giving free registration to non-authors, people that aren't presenting, does jeopardize as I mentioned before, the perceived value of a conference. And we do want people to see value in conferences. We do want people to actually participate in conferences. And as we've already heard, with virtual conferences, we have lost the opportunity for informal discussions and networking. And networking is great for lots of different reasons, but I don't want to forget informal discussions. So when you present a paper, there's always a question and answer period. A little more difficult to do in a virtual format, but certainly possible. But what I've also often found valuable is the opportunity to speak with an author, or when I'm an author, to have someone speak to me later on in an informal setting, and then we can really get into some of the technical details that were in the paper and there wasn't time to present, and so that can be lost. There are ways to simulate some of that, but it's still relatively stilted. So. I believe the hybrid format is going to be the short-term solution to that, and whether technology can find us ways around that, it's something that remains to be seen. So with that, just let me summarize. Obviously, 2020 has been a very challenging year for conference organizers. And I think overall they've done very, very well. They've worked very, very hard. 2021 will certainly bring new challenges, and maybe 2022 is the start of a steady state new normal. You know, the challenges have been there for all conferences. Certainly the challenges have been there for GUCON 2020. I congratulate you for putting together a fine virtual program this year, and look forward to you navigating the remaining challenges of this year and challenges in coming years as well. Thank you.